Hello, Ayong, Hasiu, Seoul. Hello, Seoul. Hello, Try Everything. My name is Stefan from Startup Genome. It is a great pleasure to be back again. I think I had the pleasure of being invited to speak at Try Everything since 2019 or 20. Greatly and have enjoyed, and we as a firm have enjoyed the rise of Seoul as such a successful startup ecosystem. I still very fondly remember our session that we had exactly a year ago in this very place. Today, no small challenge. We were asked to come up with ideas, our perspective on how Seoul can become a top 5 global ecosystem. That's ambitious. That's no small feat. Gave us a bit of a headache, but we tried to think through a number of topics, a number of themes, a number of strategies that really could further hopefully inform policymakers and ecosystem leaders here in Seoul. Who are we? Startup Genome, a small, highly specialized research and policy advisory firm out of San Francisco and London. We work towards understanding ecosystem performance. We rank ecosystems. We publish a ranking report, Global Startup Ecosystem Report, every year, very much anticipated with great resonance in the public. That's what you know us from. But we don't do ranking just for the sake of ranking and to assign a rank to a city or a region, but we do it to inspire policy discussion, to see what works, what works less, what can we learn as a network of today more than 130 or so ecosystems from each other. What does inspire us? That's really what we are in for. That's what we do. We are a bunch of entrepreneurs and ex-business consultants all working towards making these policy experiments and this advice as effective as possible and bringing entrepreneurship to as many places in the world as possible. And I think as a world, we are making progress there. So many more cities in Korea, elsewhere, participating outside of the top 10, top 20 tech clusters. So we've come a long way, but we still have quite a way to go. Back to topic, how can we become a global top 5 ecosystem? Before we do that, I would love to, if this works, give me a sec. Might need a bit of help. Is that one? Oh, there we are. Sorry. Where are we? 3 topics. First of all, Seoul, where are we right now in our global ecosystem ranking and what can we learn from that position? A little bit of insight. We launched the GSER report a few months ago in London and in Amsterdam. And we will certainly have the next one coming in June next year, so next time to measure. From there, 3 ecosystem opportunities we believe are the top priorities to consider if we want to become one of the top 5, the top leaders, top echelon of cities in the world for tech entrepreneurship. And last but not least, a few simple recommendations. Underneath those is a lot of detail that we can go into Q&A or after the session here if you're interested. So where are we right now? First of all, let me get out of the way. This is our ecosystem ranking from this year, fresh from data processing. And there has been quite a lot of movement, not so much in the absolute top. Silicon Valley, London, New York always ruled the world for tech, and they continue to do so. But the other ecosystems have seen growth and changes, and some have declined in their rankings. I think there are 1 or 2 big themes coming through, particularly in the Asia region. Indian ecosystems are on the rise, broader, more of them, undoubtedly, whilst China, not the least due to COVID policies and other economic issues, has really lost its shine and luster a little bit. That's certainly reflected in the rankings. More interesting, one of the top ecosystems and one that we'll be talking about in a minute, Tel Aviv has impressed us immensely. It already has been within the top 10 for years. But to make it into the top 5 category was an extraordinary feat for what in the end is an ecosystem that sits in a very small economy and in a very small population. Extraordinary policy, extraordinary activities that we should have a closer look at. And last but not least to mention, Singapore. Singapore was always one of the highly regarded ecosystems in Asia. We never saw, though, the growth, the scale-up growth, companies really coming out of Singapore, conquering the world, and creating the bigger scaling stories, the bigger valuations. We have not seen that for 10, 15 years. Now we see it. Singapore jumps by 10 points. Again, something to look at because it speaks to a scaling journey from Singapore out into the world. It has finally happened, but it has taken 15, 20 years, and we've been working with these policymakers. Something to point out. Seoul, number 12, so nearly unchanged. We dropped by 2 ranks. I think that's pretty normal in this category. Rankings always fluctuate a little bit, so nothing to be sad about. That would be the wrong message. I think it's an extraordinary positioning for Seoul. Last year I could say top 10. Yeah, that sounds somehow better, but the meaning is the same. Here amongst the top ecosystems for tech worldwide, undoubtedly. Brief look at the Asian ecosystems, what I already mentioned. Where is Seoul positioned? Number 4. And if you would take out China with its large domestic market that behaves completely different, it's completely different growth dynamics from the rest of the world, we would rank Seoul as the number 2 ecosystem just behind Singapore. I think that's a hugely positive message and one to tell loudly and clearly. Again, this has been a sustained journey. I think that's always important for us, not to look at 1 year only, but to see what has happened over time. And I think you can see the results from 2019, number 53 in the world in our ranking, to a number 10, number 12 position in the world. Great policy, the activation of community, nearly 5,000 startups we believe to measure, at least in Seoul. These are the really growth stories, We see the evaluations come through, we see the unicorns coming through with this phase. The big message here is this seems to be a sustained position at the top of ecosystems worldwide. We rank more than 300, so being 10 or 12 is a very respectable, very high position indeed. We also use a model that we call ecosystem maturity model that tells us how does an ecosystem behave. There are certain characteristics, and we place all the ecosystems in the world into 4 categories. The right-hand side is London, New York, and Silicon Valley, of course, nobody else, and then the others are distributed. From a performance perspective, we rank Seoul at the end of the globalization phase. That's where companies start stepping out of the domestic market. They start attracting resource, venture investment from abroad, start attracting top talent from abroad. We see Seoul really at this cusp of from globalization to activation. Why is that important to us, this model? Not for model's sake, but because it indicates the need for a significant policy change. So the old recipes, they have been so successful, 53 to 10 or 12 in the world. Now is the time to rethink them a little bit in order to get to this next phase that we would call activation ecosystem phase, where the top echelon of ecosystems of cities in the world really sits. That's what we can deduce from a decade of research. Yeah, to think about it, to say, okay, the old recipes have helped us. Now is a new dawn, a new day, and we need to change. TAC and SBA and SMG, whom we have been working with so much over all these years, with their vision for 2030, have certainly already taken these steps. So what would it take for Seoul to become a number 5 ecosystem? Let's compare ourselves. I will show a few, as a warning, as a health warning, I will show a few data with a minus or a gap and lots of red on the slide. This is by no means criticism regarding Seoul's performance. We are comparing ourselves, not against the world, but we are comparing against ourselves against the top 5 in the world. So no surprise if there's a little bit of red on these slides. First of all, we've plotted out the top 5 ecosystems. You see them here: Silicon Valley, New York, London, Los Angeles, Tel Aviv, and Seoul. The number of startups, for us important. We need a big community, lots of experiments in order to create scale-up success, high valuations, unicorns. It is a numbers game, and it stays a numbers game. So that's one of the axes that's important to us. On the other axis, we show ecosystem value. That's all valuations plus exit values combined. And you can see for yourself where we are. Here, about 55% of the median size of all ecosystems. So we are not comparing against Silicon Valley, but the median value of the top 5, just to give you a little bit of a perspective. That's where we are. And to unpack that a little bit more, hopefully. Oops. Really sorry. There we are. Here we are doing a comparison across different ecosystem success factors, as we call them. You see them here: ecosystem value, Number of active unicorns as a proof, as a result. Number of exits over 50 million, so companies that have reached scaling growth stage. Seed median size of funding rounds, again, an indicator of how meaty, how large are these seed rounds that enable companies to really invest into product, to invest into building market reach, are they big enough? And then a little bit of performance factors around what is the exit value, what are the number of exits. That's just a function of success in the end. Tel Aviv is our comparison, and here's Seoul. And we see, and that's what I meant with the red elements, of course, we are not yet at number 5 performance. You can see the different gaps here. I think they are quite similarly placed. We just need to be aware of that. From our perspective, there are a number of factors influencing those, and I want to unpack these a little bit going forward. Again, same picture with the median of the top 5 ecosystems in the world compared. You can see for yourselves the differences where we still are. So the overall message, it's still a way to go. But again, we are comparing with the absolute top in the world. What would it mean to catch up with Tel Aviv within 5 years? Is this realistic at all? We believe it is. Startup creation. Tel Aviv today shows 6,400 something startups in our methodology versus 4,800 something in Seoul. If you want to catch up within 5 years, that's a compound annual growth rate of 6% per year, 300 startups per year, something the like for Seoul. And we believe that's entirely possible to create this growth. This is not a scenario that's unrealistic to believe is achievable. Our typical growth rate that we measure across many ecosystems would say 6% is absolutely manageable. Yeah, that's what we really would like to see if we stay with a simple measure such as startup creation. So making the ecosystem even larger, and then we will see ecosystems behave like funnels. I need a big base, thousands of startups, and then we will see the higher valuations and the ecosystem value to increase as a function of that. If we compare again, comparison to the top 5 in the world, the median values, the things get a little bit more ambitious. We would need to grow by 30% in terms of startup population per year. From my perspective, I've never seen that anywhere. 10, 15%, maybe, just about. I think this is a bit unrealistic. So I think if we focus on Tel Aviv as a yardstick, we are well advised. And it's something that's realistic for policymakers to consider, for ecosystem leaders to consider, not to have goals that are too ambitious and maybe unrealistic at some point. How do we get there? What should we do practically? We believe there are 3 lenses to look at ecosystem development for Seoul. The first one, capitalizing on the deep tech opportunity that undoubtedly is here, and it's here to stay. Secondly, driving scale-up success. We heard in the session beforehand how scaling works, how approaching international markets can work so successfully. And last but not least, we also believe there are still some remaining funding gaps in the funding landscape for Seoul that we jointly should have a look at and try to address. Seoul can capitalize on its R&D prowess. We know Seoul, we know Korea as one of the most innovative countries in tech in the world in every ranking that we look at. And how does that fit into the world of startups? We've seen deep tech startups based on deep tech-based technology startups provide all the growth in startup ecosystems over the last few years. It is the generation of deep tech that we are in. You can see it here, 41% of all startups created and of all deals that we have measured are in deep tech already, coming from a much lower base 10 years ago. So we are in this wave of deep tech undoubtedly. What's happening in deep tech? What we are showing here is exit values. So these are the mature on the horizontal axis. What is maturing in the world? And on the y-axis, this is Series A growth, an indicator for dynamics in an ecosystem. And what we really can see is that advanced manufacturing robotics, it is showing the exits. It is still showing a huge dynamic. There's a lot of seed and Series A money going into it. No doubt we are in an age where manufacturing capability, people are scarce, human resources are scarce, and we are all in the world driving automation, automated production, supply chains, etc. So that's exactly where deep tech is happening. It is certainly happening in clean tech, finally, second approach. We had one in the 2000s or 2010s. That didn't really lead to scaling companies, didn't really lead to impact. That has fundamentally changed. We see the exits coming through, the maturity of the clean tech segment, and we see a lot of dynamism. No wonder we are talking climate change. We got demand-led policies that actually seem to work in Europe, in the US, and in parts of Asia, and they have an impact on our industry. Last but not least, AI and big data today embedded in nearly all deep tech ventures and technologies. Again, one of these segments that no ecosystem can afford not to invest in. Yeah? AI, big data needs to be a core part of any strategy from our perspective. You see a few others that are falling off a little bit. EdTech, as an example, digital media. These are the things of the first and second generation of the internet, less hot, less successful. So it's clearly the deep tech story that we have to tell and to capitalize on. These are the AI deals globally. And again, you can see the rise here. 23% of all startups already have AI at the very core of their tech stack. They would not function without a core AI engine. And that's only going to grow, so we believe. Does Seoul show the characteristics of a future leader in deep tech? Yeah. We believe yes. And we use a model in which we categorize all the startup ecosystems in the world into different archetypes. They're the first and early movers. That's Silicon Valley, the founders of tech. Technology production, these are the R&D powerhouses in the world. They have certain characteristics. We got others, very large, differentiated markets. That's China, that's maybe India, that's North America, the US. Openness, quality of life, these are the creatives, the Barcelonas, the Berlins and others that are more living from their creatives and arts. And last but not least, the global business and financial centers, being New York and London, for argument's sake. Why are we trying to make these categorizations? Because policies, investment into policy activity is fundamentally different in these different ecosystem archetypes. So it really helps us devise the right approach. And undoubtedly here, we got a list again of where they are. This is the result of our mapping. We use a lot of data points to do that. And the yellow line describes Seoul, and it is very firmly, these are the R&D powerhouses in the world, the Tel Avivs, the Stockholms, and others, that for us are the leaders in the deep tech R&D-led ecosystem development. Seoul is firmly here. It shows all the right characteristics in STEM talent, PhD production, corporations that are investing into technology, etc., etc. But interesting, and I really find this incredibly encouraging. We are also seeing a little bit of a bulge here in the data around the arts and the creative industries, and this mix of R&D powerhouse, but also the creative industry, from our perspective, is a hugely positive combination that can only power Seoul further forward. When we look at R&D powerhouses, what has worked well for those that were the leaders a while ago, that really early on were betting on an R&D-led ecosystem development strategy, being Tel Aviv, being Stockholm. High levels of R&D investment, same in Korea. STEM and PhD talent investment development, same here. Absolutely competitive, if not better. What did they do? They grew their global connectedness, global market reach, making their companies step out of their very small domestic markets, of course, Israel or Sweden, very, very early on, and really helped them towards developing a foothold in the US market, the European markets, and elsewhere. So really this stepping out, letting the companies even move to other locations, seeing that as a positive for somebody coming from Stockholm, going to London and scaling to a world market leader there, that was accepted as a good strategy that would work, and it paid back in terms of the development of these ecosystems. So really the outward, that's what I'm trying to articulate here. Let's not look at ourselves, but let's look at how can we step outside of the Korean market early on if we are in deep tech, if you want to make deep tech work. Last but not least, they've invested heavily in what we call lab to startup ecosystem efficiency. These are the on-ramps. So you got the academics doing a lot of research, patents, citations, publications. And then we got the totally different world, the entrepreneurs such as us. How do we bring these two worlds together? How effective are we in taking an idea from a lab code to a real business? That's what we try to measure. That's certainly what Tel Aviv, certainly what Sweden has mastered, and is a good example to learn from. So here are the results, lab to startup efficiency in life sciences. I've jumped one too far. Advanced manufacturing robotics I wanted to bring first because it's so important for the Korean economy and something where R&D is at such a high level. So here we show on the horizontal axis, how good are we in our R&D, our universities, our academic institutions, how good are we at innovating? And Seoul is a leader globally in that perspective. The y-axis, how good are we in terms of ecosystem performance, meaning taking these ideas and creating businesses out of them. And that's where we still have gaps. We can see it here. Tel Aviv is on par in terms of academic prowess, but it is much more effective in taking the ideas from the university into business. I don't think anybody is surprised, but this is something to learn from, to look at, to study. Now we should see the same for life sciences. It's nearly the same picture. Forgive me, this is a bit slow. This is life sciences. Again, here's Seoul, one of the leaders in terms of academic results, R&D research, but in terms of really creating an ecosystem in life sciences and bioscience, San Diego is inferior. Less academic prowess, less patents, less deep insights, but so much more effective in bringing it to a real-world application into ecosystem development. So again, examples where we should study more, learn from, and try to emulate what seems to be a successful strategy. Same in AI. Again, here's Seoul, there's Tel Aviv. We're competing in the academic world, eye to eye, but we are not yet competing in terms of creating the startups. So this is the huge opportunity. Next question, how do we exploit the deep tech opportunities, if they are so important? Key issues from our perspective, and we've been testing that with a lot of different cities, is really to think ecosystem-wide. If I want to play in deep tech, I need the larger corporations. They need to participate. They are my first clients. We heard it for SAS this morning. It's a B2B game. So how do we make the corporations more open towards collaborating with the startup ecosystem, engaging in open innovation, buying from startups? Where are we here, and how can we improve? Culture and the executive board, how open is the CEO, the CXO, the C-suite in terms of working with startups? Personally, I had the opportunity to work with 150 companies, large corporations in my life. It is no small feat to convince executives to have a different approach to their innovation processes, to bring outside innovation in, to bet on a startup ecosystem, on startups, to help them address their corporate challenges. But it is entirely possible. Open innovation programs, grant challenges. Switzerland, in the UK, elsewhere, we've run experiments around defining problems that are too large for even the largest companies to resolve in their own right, but rather to build consortia consisting of large corporations, public sector agencies, innovative startups to tackle big societal, big economic problems jointly. Yeah, so they really come together as a startup ecosystem and become more permeable and collaborate better. These are the things that we believe need to be addressing. Don't waste a good moment of crisis. That's also one. We saw the effects that COVID had on driving investment into technology, and I think we are in a similar position here. Economic recession around the world. We need to get more productive. Technology will help us. Deep tech will help us overcome these challenges. Same for clean tech. Same for so many other applications. That's certainly a call to action where corporate executives might be more open than they have been in the past. Universities, culture. If I'm a young student today, or it's not a young student, a PhD, I want to become a professor, I better start publishing. I better get a lot of citations that will be rewarded in typical university culture, certainly in Europe. I believe it applies in large parts of Asia as well. That's certainly what's happening. Can we change that? Can we change it at the institutional level? Can we encourage university the deans, the leaders of universities, to pay more attention towards those that are innovating or inventing in the lab, but also innovating in terms of supporting the creation of companies. Fundamental change in the academic mindset that needs to come. More formal incentives for professors, young professors, researchers to engage in activities that are commercialization of their research. These are the topics that we need to address and really explore. More systematic programs, open innovation programs, tech transfer, certainly funding for experiments for researchers to be able to take their ideas and build a startup, grants to run with those. This is the typical mix of activities we would recommend. We are doing that at the moment. It's not easy with a large university cluster in Melbourne. It is a very difficult journey, particularly when you look at culture, when you look at incentives to change the apparatus of a university environment and the culture and the mindset. But it is possible, and it is certainly happening. Fundamental ingredient for our startup communities, if all this happens, I think we are in a great spot, because as entrepreneurs, we get not presented, but we get engaged with problems that are really worth solving for, coming from the corporates, coming from invention, from deep innovation in research. We hopefully can have access to better facilities when we are in deep tech. We need the labs, we need a production environment to test our products. That needs providing for. Again, coming back to the Melbourne example, when I talk to the deep tech startups there, or the life sciences startups there, saying the biggest constraint we have in the universities is the availability of wet labs. Simply not available. The big corporations are taking them all. We don't have access. This is something we need to change, and that's where policy can help. Real client contracts. Clients, corporations that are willing to buy from us as startup entrepreneurs, that will give us real testing opportunity and revenue, and the entire engine starts to spin. So it's not the one silver bullet. It's a mix of all these different activities that would allow us to build a better deep tech environment. Here we've put together, and I don't want to read them out in detail, different policies at the research base. That's the academic part on the left-hand side. In the middle, the intermediaries, the tech transfer units, what needs to change there? What are recommendations for this intermediate layer between research and economic use? And then, of course, ecosystem factors. I want to point out one or two. At the national policy level and the institutional policy level, the treatment of IP ownership, is maybe one of the biggest ones that need addressing from our perspective in so many places in the world, where IP still belongs to the university, belongs to the investment when it is a state-run program, belongs to the state. This is not the way to incentivize somebody to create a company. It's not the way to incentivize an investor, a seed stage VC, to go into an investment for a startup. That really needs to change. Learning from Tel Aviv, learning from Stockholm are good examples here. This is one from our perspective to point out. Many others on that list. Second one, driving scale-up success, our second lens, our second part of strategy recommendations we really would like to make. We've analyzed what we call Seoul baby unicorns already last year for you. So apologies, it's an old slide, but it is still relevant. The blue line from our perspective are companies valued between 50 million and $1 billion in Seoul that have what it takes. They are unique in their business model, in their application of technology. They could be the next global category leaders. The red line, this is more Me Too business models we've seen elsewhere, and there's maybe less scaling potential in the world. That's where we are. There's a huge population of really innovative companies, but then when we analyze what is their market reach, what is the percentage of revenue they are generating outside of their domestic market, you can see it here, the vast majority, this is Seoul, the vast majority of their business is still very, very domestic. This is fundamentally different behavior to the other ecosystems that are so much more geared towards catering to a world market, to addressing a global market. Look at London as an example, as an extreme example here, or Tel Aviv, even more extreme. They are building for the world from day one. So how can we change that? Global market reach, the connections we have, and we measure them at Startup Genome for all the ecosystems as part of our ranking. Where are we here in Seoul? These are the different factors: ecosystem performance, funding landscape, the experience of our founders, the availability of experienced talent, and global market reach. And this is our radar graph here. You can see the top 5 ecosystems plotted out. Silicon Valley, the orange one, and the blue one, then is Seoul. And you can see the gap that we have. If we have the biggest gap for us remains global market reach, the ability to create connections and to create export success for our startups. It's very stark. Yeah, this is probably the biggest opportunity, and I'm so glad we discussed it in the session prior to mine this morning already, what needs to happen and what can happen here. Have we improved over the last year? Not so much. We looked through our rankings, you see them, funding, so. Experience going up in Seoul as a function of so many entrepreneurs being here. But market reach is really the one where we have even lost ground in the last year a little bit, yeah? Showing our analysis. Here we would hope for more activity that helps founders step out of the Korean market and develop these international categories. What does it take to scale a business properly? This is our new scale-up report, not published yet. We are meant to show that at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress next week in Australia. So don't tell anybody I've showed it, but I wanted to show it for our entrepreneurs in the room. What does it really take to, or what are key success factors in scaling a business? The global scale-up rate is 3.8% on average. 100 startups, 3.8 make it to a scale-up. If you have advisors with equity in your company, ideally advisors that can mentor, ideally advisors that have international business relationships, you grow your chance of success to 5.6%. If you have founder connections to fellow founders, other entrepreneurs in the top ecosystems in the world, more than 4 connections was our measure here, you grow to 7% in terms of probability of scaling success. And last but not least, if you really manage to have more than 20% of your revenue abroad in another continent, scale-up rate goes up to 10.4%. Statistics maybe not so interesting. What's really interesting is the difference. If you don't do these things, you see what happens to your scale-up rate, it goes down. The difference being at 25x. These very simple measures: get the right advisors, get the right connections to other ecosystems, to other founders, to tap their knowledge base and try to build this export business. The difference is 25x in scale-up success. So we find the results are quite impressive, and I hope they encourage many founders to do these things and to look at these things. Oop. I think we are stuck again. Oh, Brian, thank you. Yeah, last but not least, addressing remaining funding gaps. We asked ourselves, how's the funding situation for Seoul startups? And this is what we call a funding attrition funnel. So at the beginning, we start at seed stage, 100%. We plot the top 5 ecosystems, and we go all the way to Series A and Series B+. And what is really interesting, we found it astonishing to see the data, is the blue line. This is Seoul, the red line is New York City. We are tracking in parallel. We have the same number of startups, the same percentage of startups that are receiving seed, Series A, even Series B+, late stage funding. On the same token, we asked ourselves, what's scale-up production rate defined as the percentage of companies valued over $100 million in valuation? 2.85% for Seoul, New York City, 27.8%. So where are these stark differences coming from? It was a bit of a conundrum, yeah? Everybody goes to late stage, Series B+, but still we don't get the scale-up rates and these larger valuations that come with scaling. We believe when we look at the average size of funding tickets in Seoul in Korea, this is Series B+, 11 million that we can measure on average. This is way too small to sustain such a scaling journey. Again, if we compare ourselves with the top 5 in the world. Yeah, I think that's where we really have a gap. We are getting Series B, but the Series B rounds are still too small to really sustain global expansion. Is this something we can fix this policy? Possibly not directly. This is not something that a bit of state funding would fix. This is a function of a business model. Is my business model export-orientated enough? Is it successful enough? Do I get the attention of Series B investors that are willing to make these larger investments that we are seeing in the other cities? So I think that's a call to action to our founders in a sense as well, to say if you're working towards a world market, you will get the larger Series B rounds that fund your expansion. If you don't, if you focus on the domestic market, you will be limited in the capital you can get access to. That's our interpretation here. I think we are not far off from the truth. The entire thing a little bit accelerated by still an absence is the wrong word, but a lower probability of foreign large VC groups investing in Korea. Last year, we did a much more detailed analysis, and it was very clear that the top groups in the world, VC groups in the world, are not as active in Seoul as they are active in the other top 5 ecosystems. Not the biggest surprise, but something to keep in mind. We need to attract more of them to make investments here. Quick recommendations. Let me sum it up. Building out the deep tech funnel. So activate universities, culture, policy change. Not easy to do. It's complex to do. It's human beings. We need to influence culture, but it is absolutely possible. And I believe we need to do more here. Subsector strategies. Can we focus on a few instead of trying to address everything at the same time? Quite probably deep tech, of course, is the priority. Invest into supporting programs that help get from the research, get from the lab into a startup, the incubators, the right incubator programs. Programs that help a very young startup coming from research also to experience international markets very early on and take that into their design, into their product design decisions. I'm so glad SPA has experimented with us a little bit of taking young deep tech startups into other places in the world. We went to Tokyo together. I think that these are initial steps that can only help to further drive success here. Soft landing programs, yes, that's what I meant, for deep tech startups to early on experience how other markets, B2B markets in the world work. Enhancing global market reach, mentorship, global scaling skills. There are a number of programs in the world. Future 50 London, as an example, I had the pleasure of working with for a number of years. Maybe the preeminent mentorship, scaling mentorship program that has really helped London become what it is. These mentorship activities, I think we need to strengthen, very much bringing in mentors from other destinations in the world where we want to step out to and develop markets. Entirely possible. And since COVID, we've seen how these networks have become much more virtual, much more accessible. So even if I'm not in Silicon Valley, not in London, I have access to experienced entrepreneurs that are giving back and that are providing these critical mentorship elements and market connections, partnerships with other ecosystems, driving VC, foreign VC participation. I think we need to talk a little bit more policy incentives for foreign VC groups to have a stronger focus on Seoul so that we fix the Series B funding gap. And again, remaining funding gaps, partnerships with foreign VCs. That's not policy, that's more informal. Developing partnerships, taking my portfolio as a Seoul-based VC to an international group to say, do you want to co-invest? Shall we partner? You bring your experience, your mentorship network as a foreign VC. I bring the very best in my portfolio from Seoul. What can we do together? I think there's a little bit more we can do. One controversial one, but I want to mention it. I think we need to go a little bit deeper in research. Review of public funding. We have the impression that seed stage funding, angel, venture VC, is almost getting crowded out by Seoul as a government doing too much of a good thing by providing a lot of grant finance, but to some degree, crowding out the formation of angel groups and of seed VCs. We want to review that. We don't have the precise data, but we believe there's an element where we can save the state a little bit of money and activate more private investment into the Seoul ecosystem. These are initial pointers that we see in data. Needs a bit more validation from our perspective. And the formation of specialized angel and seed VC groups that really have an understanding of bioscience or of robotics and are willing to invest into these deep tech technologies. That's it in a nutshell. Where does that leave us? Try to show a little bit what are the costs of these different strategies, what is their impact. Deep tech plus 25% in exits. That's what we would expect from a deep tech strategy. Much more important, significantly broaden the funnel all across the ecosystem. So if we need to create a few thousand more startups to compete with Tel Aviv, we would hope that they are coming from deep tech, and policies, programs should be in place that support this growth, startup creation, and deep tech. So this is a really broad and diverse portfolio of activities that we think would be the right ones. This is a long-term game. This is not something that has immediate effect, but it's all the more important to address. Very different global connectedness, global market reach, mentorship to scale companies to foreign markets is something that directly results in higher investments, higher valuations, and exits in our experience. So we would believe an investment into programs in that space will directly, or very quickly at least, trigger a 100% increase in exits and these higher valuations that we are looking for. Funding, again, an important component, maybe 2x for exits, and it supports new segments such as deep tech, so it's part of the cluster of activities. And last but not least, if you are continuing to make these investments, all the good work around community building and talent activation, bringing more people into the Seoul startup ecosystem that you all have done over the last few years needs to continue, because we need to bring thousands more entrepreneurs and tech startup executives into that space. That's it in a nutshell. I hope this gives you a little bit of an impression. Again, deep tech for sure, the growth mentorship to step into foreign markets, and addressing and refining a little bit the funding instruments would be our recommendations if we are to make it 6% compound annual growth rate in terms of startup creation than we are with Tel Aviv in 5 years' time. It's a great objective. Thanks for giving us a chance to present initial thoughts, and we would love an ongoing discussion with all of you going forward, and hopefully next year we are already on our way to the top 5. Thank you very much.